What is the price of silence? For Julian Croft, a high-flying tech entrepreneur, it was $200 million. When he divorced his quiet, unassuming wife Emily, he saw it as cutting dead weight. He took the house, the savings, their shared history, and left her with almost nothing. She didn't fight, she didn't argue. She simply signed the papers and walked away in silence. 6 months later, a single announcement in Forbes magazine would not only shatter Julian's world, but expose a secret so vast it would make his entire life's ambition look like pocket change. This is the story of the silent wife he discarded, and the moment the world discovered she was an heiress to a fortune he couldn't even fathom. The silence in their Boston penthouse had become a physical presence as thick and suffocating as the coastal fog that often crept in from the harbor. It wasn't the comfortable silence of two people who knew each other's thoughts, but the vast empty space between two strangers who happened to share a mortgage. Emily Vance felt it most acutely in the evenings. She would be in her small studio, a converted sunroom overlooking the Charles River, the scent of turpentine and oil paint clinging to her clothes while her husband Julian Croft was in his home office, the rhythmic tapping of his keyboard the only sign he was even there. They had been married for 8 years. The first 5 were a whirlwind of shared dreams built in a cramped apartment with second-hand furniture and take-out cartons. Julian, with his razor-sharp ambition and charisma that could charm investors out of their life savings, was the engine of their life. Emily, with her quiet nature and steady job at the Boston Public Library's rare books department, was his anchor. She believed in him with a ferocity that often surprised even herself. She packed his lunches, proofread his business proposals, and celebrated every small victory as if it were the moon landing. Her modest salary kept them afloat while his first startup, a predictive analytics company called EtherTech, burned through cash. Then, EtherTech landed a massive Series A funding round led by the venture capital firm Sequoia Capital. Everything changed overnight. The cramped apartment was replaced by the penthouse. The takeout cartons were replaced by catered parties where Emily felt more like staff than the host. Julian's wardrobe shifted from worn-out sweaters to custom-tailored Tom Ford suits. His language changed too. He started using words like synergy, disruption, and burn rate in casual conversation. He stopped talking about our dream and started talking about my legacy. Emily tried to keep up. She traded her comfortable cardigans for designer dresses that felt like costumes. She tried to engage with his new friends, sleek, predatory men and women who sized you up by the watch on your wrist and the stock options in your portfolio. But she was an analog soul in a digital world. Her passions were the crisp scent of aging paper, the subtle shift of light in a Vermeer painting, and the quiet satisfaction of bringing a canvas to life with her own hands. These were things that couldn't be quantified, optimized, or monetized. In Julian's new world, they were worthless. The dismissal was gradual at first. He'd call her work at the library a cute little hobby. He'd glance at her paintings and say, "That's nice, Ellie," before immediately changing the subject to EtherTech's latest valuation. The final, sharpest cut came 6 months before the end. She had spent a year working on a portrait of him from their early days, capturing the hunger and hope in his eyes. She unveiled it for their anniversary, her heart pounding with a mixture of pride and vulnerability. Julian stared at it for a long, silent moment. She saw a flicker of something in his eyes, recognition, perhaps even regret, before it was extinguished, replaced by a cool, appraising gaze. "It's good," he said, the word hanging in the air like a poorly executed note. "But it's not the right image. It's not who I am anymore. We need something more aspirational for this space. Something by a known artist. It's about brand alignment." He didn't see a gift of love. He saw a branding conflict. That was the moment Emily knew her husband was gone, replaced by the CEO of EtherTech. The man she had married was now just a ghost in a photograph she herself had painted. The woman who replaced her was named Savannah Sterling. Emily didn't know her name at first, only the signs of her existence. The scent of a different perfume on his suits, the late-night board meetings that stretched until 3 a.m., the way he guarded his phone as if it were a state secret. Savannah was everything Emily wasn't. She was the COO of a rival tech firm, a fixture on Boston's social scene, and she looked perfectly at home in the glossy pages of a magazine. Julian wasn't just having an affair. He was upgrading. The end came on a Tuesday. It was raining, a relentless, miserable downpour that matched the mood inside the penthouse. Emily was cataloging some newly acquired 18th century manuscripts for the library, finding solace in the careful, precise work. Julian walked in not in his usual suit, but in expensive athleisure wear that screamed, "I just came from a session with my personal trainer." He didn't sit down. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a silhouette against the gray, churning sky. "Emily," he began, his voice devoid of any emotion, "this isn't working." She didn't look up from her work, her fingers tracing the faded ink of a long-dead poet. "I know." Her quiet acceptance seemed to unnerve him. He had clearly rehearsed for a fight, for tears, for pleas. He was prepared for a scene, not this heavy, resigned calm. "I've been thinking about it for a while," he continued, gaining momentum. "We've grown apart. We want different things. I'm on a trajectory that requires a different kind of partner, someone who understands the pressures, the networking, the world I live in." Someone like Savannah Sterling, Emily thought, but she said nothing. "I've spoken to my lawyer," he said, the words now coming quickly, clinically. "Marcus Thorne. He's the best. He'll draw up the paperwork. I want this to be amicable. Clean. I'm prepared to be generous." Emily finally looked up. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, met his. There was no anger in them, only a profound, bottomless sadness. "What is your definition of generous, Julian?" He shifted his weight, uncomfortable under her direct gaze. "I'll let you keep your car, and I'll provide a settlement, say $50,000, to help you get on your feet. Find a new place. It's more than fair, considering you haven't contributed financially in years." The cruelty of the statement was breathtaking. The years she worked to support them, the inheritance from her parents she had poured into his first failed venture, the emotional labor of holding their life together, all erased. In his mind, her contribution had a zero balance. She stood up, her movements slow and deliberate. She walked over to her easel, where the portrait of the younger, hopeful Julian still stood, covered by a white sheet. She didn't say a word. She simply looked at the shrouded painting, then back at the stranger standing by the window. "Fine," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Have your lawyer send the papers." Julian looked relieved, almost giddy. The final obstacle to his new life had crumbled with barely a whisper of protest. He had expected a war. Instead, he got a surrender. He saw it as weakness, as a confirmation that he was right to discard her. He had no idea that her silence wasn't weakness. It was a judgment. The offices of Marcus Thorne Esker were a monument to aggressive litigation. Located on the 45th floor of the Prudential Tower, the space was a symphony of chrome black leather and glass, offering a panoramic view of a city that Julian felt he was on the verge of conquering. Thorne himself was a reflection of his environment, sharp, expensive, and with the predatory stillness of a shark. Julian sat on one side of the vast mahogany table, radiating impatience. He checked his Patek Philippe watch every few minutes. He had a lunch meeting with a potential investor from Bain Capital. This divorce was just an administrative task he needed to clear from his schedule. Emily sat opposite him, accompanied only by a court-appointed legal aide, a young, earnest woman named Sarah who looked thoroughly intimidated by the setting. Emily, by contrast, seemed utterly unfazed. She was dressed in a simple gray dress, her long brown hair tied back in a neat bun. She looked like a librarian who had taken a wrong turn and ended up in a corporate boardroom, yet she possessed a composure that was unnerving. Marcus Thorne cleared his throat, a sound like gravel being sifted. "Mrs. Croft, or soon-to-be Ms. Vance again." He began, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. "We have here the final divorce settlement. As you'll see, my client, Mr. Croft, has been exceptionally generous." He pushed a thick document across the table. Sarah, the legal aide, began to flip through it, her brow furrowed in concentration. Julian leaned forward. "Look, Ellie, let's just get this over with. I've given you what we discussed. The $50,000 you keep, the Honda, your personal items. Everything else, the penthouse, the investment portfolios, the art collection, the savings remains with me. It's a clean break. The business is mine, I built it. It's straightforward." Sarah looked up from the papers, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Mr. Thorne, this isn't a settlement, it's a capitulation. Under Massachusetts law, marital assets are to be divided equitably. Mrs. Croft is entitled to a significant portion of EtherTech's valuation, the value of this property, and substantial alimony. We're talking millions. $50,000 is an insult." Thorne chuckled a low, dismissive sound. "Your client was a librarian, not a business partner. EtherTech's success is a result of Mr. Croft's genius and hard work, period. We are prepared to argue in court that her contribution was negligible. A drawn-out legal battle will be unpleasant and expensive." He directed his gaze at Emily. "We'll dig into every aspect of your life. Are you sure you want that?" The threat was clear. They would paint her as a gold digger who contributed nothing, and they would use Julian's vast resources to bury her in legal fees until she was bankrupt. Julian added his own touch. "Don't be difficult, Emily. Take the deal. It's the smart play. You can't afford to fight me." All eyes turned to Emily. Sarah looked at her, pleading with her to let her fight. Julian looked at her with a mixture of pity and annoyance. Thorne looked at her with the confidence of a man who had never lost. Emily picked up the pen. Her hand was perfectly steady. She looked past Julian, past his lawyer, out the window at the sprawling city below. She had walked these streets with him when he had nothing but a dream. She had believed in that dream more than he did. And now, in this sterile room, that dream was being used as a weapon to erase her. She didn't look at the clauses divvying up their life. She didn't look at the paltry sum offered in exchange for her silence and her past. She didn't look at the man she had once loved. She simply turned to the last page and signed her name, Emily Vance. A collective breath was released in the room. Julian's relief was palpable. He stood up, smoothing down his suit jacket. "Good, that's settled. Marcus, send over the final confirmation." He didn't offer a handshake or a final word to Emily. He simply turned and walked out of the room, his phone already pressed to his ear, moving on to the next more important transaction. Marcus Thorne gathered his papers, a triumphant glint in his eye. He had won. Another easy, brutal victory. "My assistant will validate your parking, Ms. Vance." He said the formality, a final dismissive jab. Once they were gone, Sarah turned to Emily, her face a mask of frustration and bewilderment. Why would you do that? We could have fought. We could have gotten you a real settlement. You're entitled to so much more." Emily finally looked at the young lawyer, and for the first time a small, sad smile touched her lips. "Sometimes, Sarah," she said softly, her voice calm and clear, "the most valuable thing you can buy is your freedom. And today I bought mine for a very low price." She stood up, gathered her simple cloth bag, and walked out of the opulent office, leaving the world of Julian Croft behind her. As the elevator descended, she didn't feel loss or defeat. She felt a strange, quiet lightness. The weight of his ambition, of his judgment, of their decaying marriage was finally lifted. She moved into a small one-bedroom apartment in Cambridge, not far from Harvard Square. It was worlds away from the penthouse. The floors creaked, the heating was temperamental, and the view was of a brick wall. And she had never been happier. She filled the space with books, with canvases, with the smell of fresh coffee and the sound of classical music. She took on extra shifts at the library, finding comfort in the hushed, sacred atmosphere. Her old friends, the few who weren't merely Julian's contacts, called, bewildered. "Are you okay?" they'd ask. "We heard what he did. It's criminal." "I'm fine," Emily would reply. And the surprising thing was, she meant it. "I'm starting over." She was free. She had her books, her art, and her name. To everyone who knew the story, Emily Vance was a tragic figure, a fool who had let a rich, powerful man walk all over her. She had been given a choice between a fight and erasure, and she had chosen erasure. No one understood that in her silence she wasn't surrendering a fortune. She was reclaiming her soul. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, Emily had settled into a rhythm that felt like her own for the first time in years. Her life was small, but it was authentic. Her days were spent amidst the quiet dignity of the library, and her nights were lost in the vibrant chaos of her painting. She was working on a new series, Abstract Landscapes, inspired not by grand vistas but by the subtle textures of her new life. The crack in the pavement, the pattern of moss on an old brick wall, the way light filtered through the dusty window of her apartment. The summons came on a crisp autumn afternoon. It wasn't a court document, but a thick cream-colored envelope delivered by a courier. The embossed letterhead read, Cromwell, Sterling and Finch, a name synonymous with old money and impenetrable legal fortresses. Puzzled, Emily slid it open. The letter was brief and formal. It requested her presence at their New York City office at her earliest convenience regarding the estate of her maternal grandfather, Arthur Vance. Emily's heart seized. Arthur Vance. The name was a ghost from a life she had long since buried. He was a titan. A reclusive billionaire who had built his empire, Vance Global Holdings, in the shadowy, unglamorous worlds of industrial shipping and rare mineral mining. He was a man of iron will and rigid principles who lived in a sprawling, isolated estate in upstate New York. He was also the man who had disowned her. When Emily had announced her intention to marry Julian Croft, a charming, ambitious nobody with no family name and no money, Arthur had been apoplectic. He had summoned her to his Gothic mansion, a place that always smelled of old leather and disapproval. "This boy is a predator," Arthur had rasped, his eyes still sharp and intelligent at 85, boring into her. "He sees you not as a woman, but as a stepping stone. His ambition is a cancer. He will use you, and when you are no longer useful, he will discard you." "You don't know him, grandfather," Emily had argued, her voice trembling with defiance. "He loves me. We're building a life together." "You are a Vance," he had thundered. "You are the last of my line. You will not throw that away on a common grifter. End it, or you are no longer my granddaughter." Emily, blinded by love and a youthful desire to forge her own path, had chosen Julian. She had walked away from Arthur, from the Vance name, and from the suffocating weight of his expectations. In the 9 years since that day, they had not spoken a single word. He never acknowledged her existence, and she, out of pride and a genuine belief in the life she was building, never reached out. Now he was dead. A week later, she found herself in a wood-paneled office in Manhattan that looked more like a private club than a law firm. The man who greeted her was named Mr. Abernathy, a partner at the firm whose family had been managing the Vance estate for 3 generations. He was in his late 60s with a kind face and solemn eyes. "Ms. Vance," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "Thank you for coming. I was your grandfather's personal attorney, and I'd like to think his friend. I'm sorry for your loss." "To be honest, Mr. Abernathy, I lost him a long time ago," Emily said quietly. "I'm not even sure why I'm here. I assume there are some papers to sign, formalities." Mr. Abernathy folded his hands on his large desk. "Your grandfather was a complicated man, stubborn, proud. He never forgave easily. He watched your life from a distance, you know." This surprised Emily. "He did. He had a private investigator provide him with monthly reports." Abernathy confirmed. "He knew about your husband's company. He knew about its success. And he knew about the divorce." Emily felt a flush of shame. So her grandfather had seen his prediction come true. He had watched her get discarded just as he said she would. The divorce was finalized on May 12th. Abernathy continued consulting a file. "Your grandfather passed away on May 15th. The timing was startling. 3 days. "He made a change to his will on the morning of May 14th. Mr. Abernathy said, his voice dropping slightly. "A final change." He slid a heavy bond document across the desk. It was Arthur Vance's last will and testament. He had a previous will drafted the day after you married Mr. Croft. In it, he left his entire fortune to a variety of charitable trusts. You were explicitly written out." "I expected as much," Emily murmured. "This new will," Abernathy said, tapping the document, "renders that one null and void. He wrote it himself with me as a witness. He was lucid, and he was for the first time in 9 years quite clear about his intentions." He paused, letting the gravity of the moment settle in the silent room. "Ms. Vance," he said, looking her directly in the eye, "Arthur Vance has named you as the sole heir to his entire estate. This includes his liquid assets, his property portfolio, his art collection, and most significantly, his 100% controlling stake in Vance Global Holdings." Emily stared at him, the words failing to compute. It felt like he was speaking a foreign language. "Sole heir? That's not possible. He disowned me." "He saw that you had been stripped of everything," Abernathy explained gently. "And he saw that you walked away with your dignity. You didn't fight for the money. In his eyes, you proved you were not a Croft. You proved you were a Vance. His final words to me on the matter were, 'The boy took the gilding, but he left the gold behind. She's ready now.'" Emily's mind was reeling. She couldn't breathe. What does this all mean in practical terms?" Mr. Abernathy took off his glasses and polished them slowly. "In practical terms, Ms. Vance, your net worth as of the market's close yesterday is estimated to be slightly north of $200 million, and you are now the chairman and majority shareholder of a multinational corporation with over 5,000 employees." Emily Vance, the quiet librarian who lived in a creaky Cambridge apartment and worried about making rent, looked down at her hands. They were stained with a bit of ultramarine blue paint from the night before. She thought of the $50,000 Julian had so generously given her, a sum that now seemed like a cosmic joke. She thought of his condescending pity of his lawyer's sneer. She had walked out of that divorce with nothing but her name, and it turned out her name was worth everything. For 6 weeks the world remained unchanged. Emily, under the careful guidance of Mr. Abernathy and a team of financial advisors, began the dizzying process of understanding her new reality. She was flown on a private jet to her grandfather's estate, a place she hadn't seen since she was 22. She walked through the silent, cavernous rooms, now hers, feeling like an intruder. She met with the board of Vance Global Holdings, a group of stern-faced men who had been loyal to her grandfather for decades, and who now looked at her with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. Through it all, she insisted on one thing: absolute privacy. No press releases, no public announcements until she was ready. She continued to live in her Cambridge apartment and work her shifts at the library. It was her only anchor to sanity in a sea of overwhelming change. She needed to be Emily the librarian for just a little while longer before she was forced to become Emily Vance the heiress. The silence was officially broken by Forbes magazine. Despite the estate's best efforts, a story of this magnitude couldn't be contained forever. A journalist known for his deep dives into the world of old money pieced it together. The headline on their website, published on a crisp October morning, was simple and devastating. The reclusive titan, Arthur Vance's secret heir, is a Boston librarian. His granddaughter, Emily Vance, inherits 200 plus empire. The article was thorough. It detailed Arthur Vance's storied career, the immense and quiet power of his company, and the shocking third-act twist of his will. It mentioned his estrangement from his only granddaughter, and most pivotally, it mentioned her recent quiet divorce from rising tech CEO Julian Croft. The journalist didn't need to add commentary. The timeline told the entire story. She was divorced in May, left with next to nothing. Her grandfather died days later. She was now one of the wealthiest women in the country. The aftershock hit Julian Croft's world like a seismic event. He was in a board meeting presenting EtherTech's quarterly growth projections when his phone, set to silent, began vibrating incessantly on the table. It was his COO, his CFO, his PR head. He ignored them, annoyed at the interruption. Then Marcus Thorne, his lawyer, sent a text in all caps. "Call me now. It's an emergency." Julian excused himself, stepping into the hallway with a frown. "Marcus, I'm in a meeting. This had better be important." "Have you seen the news, Forbes?" Marcus's voice was strained, panicked. "No, what is it?" "It's Emily," Marcus said, the name sounding alien in his mouth. "Her grandfather was Arthur Vance, of Vance Global Holdings. He died, Julian. He left her everything." Julian's mind went blank. Vance. He vaguely remembered Emily mentioning a stubborn old grandfather, but she'd made him sound like some retired farmer, not a legendary tycoon. "What do you mean, everything?" "Everything means everything," Marcus hissed. "The company, the estate. Julian, the initial estimates are over $200 million. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. The sleek, air-conditioned hallway suddenly felt hot and tight. He leaned against the glass wall, his knuckles white as he gripped his phone. 200 million. The number was nonsensical. It was a rounding error in a nation's budget. It was more than the entire valuation of the company he had dedicated his life to building. His mind flashed back to the divorce meeting. Emily's calm face, her simple gray dress, her silence. He had seen it as weakness, as the quiet acceptance of a woman who knew her own worthlessness. He felt a wave of nausea. It wasn't weakness, it was contempt. She had sat there knowing this was a possibility and let him discard her for $50,000. She had watched him preen and posture secure in a secret that made his entire world look like a child's sandcastle. He ended the call and stumbled back into the boardroom. The faces of his investors and executives turned to him expectant. He opened his mouth to speak about projections and synergy, but all he could see was Emily's face at the signing table. The quiet dignity, the utter lack of fear, the pity in her eyes that he had mistaken for sadness. The news spread through the tech and finance circles of Boston like wildfire. At first it was just shock. Then it turned to a dark schadenfreude-laced humor. Julian Croft, the man who preached about vision, about seeing the next big thing, had been married to a golden goose and had traded her in for a pittance. He wasn't a visionary, he was the biggest fool in the history of venture capital. That evening he was at a cocktail party with Savannah. The mood was different. The usual fawning sycophants were keeping their distance, watching him from afar, whispering behind their hands. Savannah, who had been ecstatic about the Forbes mention of her as Julian's new powerful partner, was now tense and irritable. "I can't believe you didn't know," she said through a clenched jaw, sipping her champagne. "How could you be married to someone for 8 years and not know her family was sitting on a fortune? She was estranged from them. She never said a word," he snapped back, his voice raw. "Well, maybe you should have asked," Savannah retorted. "God, Julian, this is a PR nightmare. It makes you look incompetent. It makes us look like a joke." He saw it then, the calculation in her eyes, the brand alignment. He hadn't just divorced Emily, he had divorced a dynasty, and in doing so he had fundamentally damaged his own brand. The mystique of Julian Croft, the infallible golden boy, was shattered. All that was left was a greedy man who had made the worst deal of his life. He felt a cold dread creep into his heart. He hadn't just lost a fortune, he was about to lose everything. The fallout was swift and brutal. An investor who had been on the cusp of leading EtherTech's Series B funding round suddenly went cold, citing a shift in market confidence. Whispers followed Julian down the hallways of his own company. His authority, once absolute, now seemed hollow. He had built his reputation on being 10 steps ahead of everyone else, and the revelation that he'd been so spectacularly blindsided in his own home eroded the very foundation of his mythos. Desperation began to set in. He saw his future, the IPO, the magazine covers, the legacy slipping through his fingers. And it all led back to one person, Emily. He became obsessed. He tried calling her, but her number had been disconnected. He drove by her old apartment in Cambridge, but the landlord said she'd moved out weeks ago, leaving no forwarding address. He was locked out, a ghost from a past she had completely excised. Finally, through a private investigator of his own, he found the address of the newly formed Vance Foundation in a discreet, elegant brownstone on Beacon Hill. This was his chance. He had to fix this. He convinced himself that their love had been real, that he had just been temporarily blinded by ambition. He could win her back. He had to. He showed up unannounced on a Wednesday afternoon. He was dressed meticulously in his most expensive suit, clutching a bouquet of lilies, Emily's favorite, that now felt absurdly inadequate. The interior of the foundation was nothing like he expected. It wasn't opulent. It was tasteful and serene, with walls adorned not with famous art, but with the vibrant, promising work of unknown artists. A polite but firm assistant told him that Ms. Vance was in a meeting. Julian, using the last dregs of his once powerful charm, insisted it was a personal emergency. Reluctantly, the assistant led him to a spacious office overlooking a private garden, and there she was. Emily. She was not the mousy librarian he remembered. She stood tall, dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored navy blue dress. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves over her shoulders. She was meeting with two young artists, discussing their work with an easy confidence he had never seen in her. The transformation was staggering. It wasn't the clothes or the setting. It was an aura of quiet power, of self-possession. She didn't look like a different person. She looked like the person she was always meant to be. She saw him, and her smile faded, replaced by a cool, neutral expression. She politely excused herself from the meeting and gestured for him to sit. The artist filed out, giving Julian a curious glance. "Julian," she said, her voice even. "This is a surprise. To what do I owe this visit?" He set the flowers down on her desk. They looked garish and out of place. Emily, I've been trying to reach you. I was so worried." A small, incredulous laugh escaped her lips. "Worried? You weren't worried when you left me with $50,000 in a 10-year-old Honda, Julian. What's changed?" "Everything's changed," he said, his voice cracking with manufactured emotion. "I heard about your grandfather. I am so sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry for everything else. I was a fool. I was drowning in the pressure of the company of that world. I lost myself. I lost us." He moved closer, his eyes pleading. "It was never about Savannah. She was a distraction, a symptom of the disease of my ambition. The man you married is still in here, the man who loved you in that tiny apartment with nothing but our dreams. We can find that again." Emily listened to his performance without interruption. Her calmness was more unsettling than any shouting match could have ever been. When he was finished, a long silence stretched between them. "Do you know what my grandfather did after he learned we were getting married?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Julian was thrown. "What? No." "He hired a firm to do a complete background check on you. A real one, not just your credit score. He sent a man posing as a potential investor to meet with you. This investor offered you a deal, seed funding for your own venture, a guaranteed position, a shortcut to everything you wanted. The only condition was that you had to sign an NDA and relocate to Singapore, alone." Julian's face went pale. He remembered the meeting. A man named Mr. Peterson. The offer had been incredibly tempting, coming at a time when he and Emily were struggling. "You turned him down," Emily continued, her eyes like chips of ice. "You told my grandfather's man that you were committed to your fiancée. My grandfather was almost impressed. He thought maybe he'd misjudged you. So he authorized the man to make a second offer for 10 times the money. All you had to do was leave me." She let the unspoken question hang in the air. Julian couldn't meet her eyes. He remembered the second offer. He remembered agonizing over it for a week, the temptation eating him alive. "You told him you needed to think about it," Emily said, finishing the story for him. "You didn't say no, Julian. You weighed my worth against a number, and you hesitated. That was all my grandfather needed to know. He saw the predator in you then, and he was right. It just took me 8 more years to see it too." The carefully constructed hope in Julian's face crumbled into raw, ugly despair. He was exposed. There was no charm, no excuse that could cover this. The money, Emily. The divorce settlement. He stammered, his true motivation finally laid bare. It's not right. You're entitled to half of my assets, but by that same token I should be entitled to... Entitled? She cut him off, her voice ringing with steel. You are entitled to nothing. You made your deal. You traded 8 years of marriage for a clean break and $50,000. You set the price, Julian, not me. I just accepted your terms. She stood up, the finality of the gesture clear. The woman you divorced is gone. The life we had is gone. You burned that bridge to the ground. You just didn't realize until now that the other side was where all the gold was. Emily, please. He begged, his voice now a pathetic whisper. Don't do this. The meeting is over, she said, her voice softening with a finality that was more painful than anger. I wish you well, Julian, truly. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, but you will not find it here. Please see yourself out. She turned away from him and looked out the window at her garden, a silent dismissal. Julian Croft stood for a moment, a man utterly defeated. The flowers sat on the desk between them, already starting to wilt. He turned and walked out of the foundation, out of her life. A king who had just realized he'd willingly given away his entire kingdom for a handful of shiny pebbles. Julian's retreat from the Vance Foundation was not just a walk of shame. It was the beginning of his complete unraveling. Emily's story about her grandfather's test played on a loop in his mind. It recontextualized his entire life. His success felt fraudulent, his ambition pathetic. He had always seen himself as a master strategist, a player of the long game. Now he knew the truth. He had been a pawn in a game so large he hadn't even been aware he was playing. The world he had built, EtherTech, began to fracture. The story of his divorce, once just gossip, was now a business legend, a cautionary tale about greed and spectacular misjudgment. Investors grew wary. If Croft's judgment was so flawed in his personal life, how could they trust his vision for the company? His employees, who had once revered him, now looked at him with a mixture of pity and contempt. The energy in the office, once electric with possibility, became sluggish and fearful. His relationship with Savannah Sterling was the next casualty. She was a creature of power and perception, and Julian was now radiating weakness. Their arguments became more frequent and vicious. The B-round funding is falling apart, Julian, she yelled at him one night in the penthouse that now felt like a gilded cage. My contacts are avoiding my calls. Your mess is starting to stick to me. So it's all about you. He shot back, his nerves frayed. You never gave a damn about me, only about what being with me could do for your career. Of course it's about my career, she admitted with shocking candor. Just like it was about yours. That was the deal. We were a power couple, but you're not powerful anymore. You're a punchline. I can't be with a punchline. She left a week later. There was no tearful goodbye, just a note on the kitchen island and an empty space in the closet where her designer clothes used to be. She was seen 2 weeks after that on the arm of a rival tech CEO, laughing at a charity gala. She had upgraded just as Julian once had. The symmetry was poetic in its cruelty. With his personal life in shambles, Julian threw himself into saving his company. He worked 18-hour days fueled by caffeine and desperation. But he was making mistakes. He pushed his team too hard, made risky financial bets, and alienated key partners with his increasingly erratic and aggressive behavior. He was trying to force the company's valuation to a point where he could prove to the world and to himself that he didn't need Emily or her family's money. The final blow came from within. A group of his senior engineers, disillusioned with his leadership and poached by a competitor, resigned en masse. They were the heart of EtherTech's innovation. Without them, the company's proprietary algorithm was just a ghost in the machine. The news leaked and the company's value plummeted. The Series B funding didn't just fall apart, it evaporated. Within 6 months of the Forbes article, Julian was forced by his board to step down as CEO. He retained a small portion of his stock, now worth a fraction of its peak value. The penthouse was sold to cover the company's debts. He who had once stood at the pinnacle of Boston's elite found himself renting a small, sterile apartment in a corporate complex in the suburbs, a place with no character and no history. One evening, sitting alone amidst his packed boxes, he saw a news segment on television. It was about the Vance Foundation's first major initiative, a multi-million-dollar grant to digitize and preserve the Boston Public Library's entire rare books collection. There was Emily speaking to the press. She was articulate, poised, and passionate. She spoke of the importance of preserving history, of making knowledge accessible to everyone. She looked happy. She looked fulfilled. She looked like she hadn't thought about him in months. He was nothing to her, not a source of anger, not a regret, not even a memory. He was just a line item in her past, a closed chapter in a book she had long since finished reading. The $50,000 he had given her felt like the most pathetic and ironic gesture in human history. He had tried to buy her silence and compliance, and instead he had paid a pittance for his own damnation. He finally understood the full scope of his loss. It wasn't just the $200 million. He had lost the woman who had believed in him before anyone else, the one person who had loved the man, not the CEO. And he had traded her for an empire of glass that was now shattered at his feet. A year after the divorce, the name Julian Croft had faded into a cautionary anecdote told over drinks in Boston's financial district. EtherTech had been acquired for its assets at a bargain basement price by a larger competitor, its name and vision absorbed and erased. Julian, having lost his board seat, his fortune, and his fiancée, had disappeared from the public eye. He lived in a soulless beige apartment complex in a town he'd once mocked as the suburbs, a place for people whose ambitions had died. One rainy Tuesday evening, while eating a microwave dinner, he saw her on a national news program. It was a segment on modern philanthropy. There was Emily, not in a boardroom, but in a brightly lit public library surrounded by children. She was announcing the Vance Foundation's latest initiative, a multi-million-dollar grant to establish mobile libraries to service underprivileged rural communities. She was poised, articulate, and radiated a calm, purposeful energy. Julian watched the plastic fork halfway to his mouth and felt a profound, hollow emptiness. It wasn't just regret for the lost money. It was the chilling realization that she had built a world of meaning and substance, while his had been a house of cards built on ego. He was no longer even the villain in her story. He was an irrelevant, forgotten prologue. He turned off the television and sat in the silent gray darkness. Emily's world, in contrast, was saturated with color and life. The Vance Foundation became a celebrated institution not for the size of its endowment, but for the intelligence and heart with which it was run. Emily had found her true calling not as a CEO, but as a cultivator of art, of knowledge, of human potential. She sold her grandfather's oppressive Gothic estate and the sterile penthouse, divesting herself of the ghosts of men who had tried to define her. She bought a beautiful, rambling 19th-century home in Cambridge, one with ivy-covered walls, overflowing bookshelves, and a large, airy studio with a wall of north-facing windows that flooded the room with perfect, consistent light. It was a space for living and creating, not for performing or impressing. Her art, now untethered from expectation or financial need, underwent a breathtaking evolution. It became her primary language. Her first solo show in a prestigious Soho gallery was the talk of the New York art scene. It was titled simply, The Silent Agreement. The gallery was packed on opening night, a humming ecosystem of critics, collectors, and artists. At the heart of the exhibition hung a massive diptych that commanded the room. The left panel was a claustrophobic vision of cold metallic grays and sharp, angular lines that seemed to compress the space, evoking the feeling of a gilded cage. The right panel was its antithesis, an explosive, soaring composition of warm, vibrant colors, deep ultramarine cadmium yellow and fiery orange that suggested boundless freedom and light. It was a raw, abstract autobiography. It was there, standing quietly in a corner and observing the crowd, that she was approached by a man. He wasn't one of the slick collectors or fawning critics. He had a tweed jacket, thoughtful eyes, behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a dusting of gray at his temples. He was Dr. Ben Carter, a history professor from Columbia University who had been drawn in by the exhibit's catalog. "Forgive me for interrupting," he began, his voice a warm baritone. "I was just struck by the title of your centerpiece, The Silent Agreement. It implies a contract. From the looks of the left panel, the terms were rather brutal." Emily, used to people asking about price or technique, was pleasantly surprised by his perception. "The terms were that one person got everything and the other person got to keep their soul," she replied, a small smile playing on her lips. "A bargain at any price, then," he said, his eyes twinkling. He had no idea she was the artist, let alone the subject of a famous financial scandal. He just saw the work and understood it on a deeply human level. Their conversation flowed effortlessly from the emotional resonance of her art to his own passion, the history of illuminated manuscripts. They discovered a shared love for the tangible past, for the stories held in paper and paint. He didn't see an heiress or a socialite. He saw a fellow scholar, a kindred spirit whose hands like his were often stained with ink and pigment. Their relationship grew as organically as the wild roses in her new garden. It was built in the quiet aisles of libraries, over cups of coffee in dusty Cambridge bookshops, and during long walks along the Charles River, the city skyline a distant glittering thing that no longer held any power over her. Ben visited her studio often, sitting for hours just to watch her paint. He understood that this was her sacred space, the place where she processed the world and translated it into her own unique language. With him, she felt seen in a way she never had with Julian. Ben wasn't interested in her brand or her trajectory. He was fascinated by the intricate, beautiful landscape of her mind. One late summer evening, they sat together in her garden as fireflies began to stitch the twilight. The air was fragrant with the scent of lavender and damp earth. "I've been thinking about your show's title," Ben said, breaking a comfortable silence. "The Silent Agreement. When you were going through all of that, did you feel like you were losing by staying quiet?" Emily looked up at the first stars pricking the deepening indigo sky. She considered the question, the memory of that cold boardroom no longer carrying a sting. "For a long time I did," she confessed. "I thought my silence was weakness, a failure to fight for what I was owed. I was surrounded by people who believed power was about shouting the loudest, about taking the most, and I just signed the paper." She paused, then turned to him, her expression clear and certain. "But I've come to understand it differently. It wasn't a surrender. It was a refusal to participate. Julian's world, his whole system, was based on a certain definition of value, market share, stock price, net worth. Fighting him on his terms would have meant accepting that his definition was the right one. My silence wasn't an agreement to his terms. It was the quietest, most powerful rejection of his entire worldview." Ben listened, his gaze full of warmth and understanding. "I wasn't giving up my share of a fortune," she continued, a note of wonder in her own voice as she articulated the thought. "I was protecting the only thing that was truly mine, my integrity. The person I was when I had nothing. That's the woman my grandfather finally saw. That's the woman I finally reclaimed for myself." She reached out and took his hand, her fingers lacing with his. "So no," she said, her voice clear and strong over the gentle hum of the cicadas. "I didn't feel like I was losing. I see it now. My silence was never the price I had to pay. It was the shrewdest investment I ever made, and it has paid off more beautifully than I could have ever imagined." Emily Vance's story isn't just about a shocking inheritance or a husband's karmic downfall. It's a powerful testament to the idea that true worth is never determined by a bank account or by someone else's validation. Julian Croft saw his wife's quiet nature as a weakness he needed to shed, but he was blind to the immense strength and integrity that lay beneath. In her silence, Emily wasn't surrendering. She was waiting. She was holding on to the one thing he could never take from her, her own identity. Her story is a reminder that the loudest person in the room is not always the most powerful, and that sometimes The greatest victories are won not with a shout, but with the quiet, dignified act of walking away and building a better life on your own terms. What did you think of Emily's incredible journey? Do you believe Julian got what he deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you were moved by this story of hidden strength and ultimate vindication, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more true life stories that will leave you speechless. Thank you for watching. Have you ever seen someone try to destroy another person's self-worth only for it to backfire in the most spectacular way imaginable? This isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of Emily Vance, a woman whose ex-husband turned their divorce into a public spectacle. He flaunted his new younger bride like a trophy, making sure Emily heard every detail of his supposed upgrade. He thought he had buried her in shame, but he made one critical mistake. He never realized who she truly was. What happens when the woman he threw away doesn't just get back on her feet, but rises so high that she ends up marrying the one man he could never hope to be? Stay tuned. Emily Vance once believed her life was a portrait of success. She was married to Michael Sterling, a charismatic and ambitious investment banker whose star was rapidly ascending at Morgan Stanley. They lived in a sleek, minimalist apartment in Tribeca with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over a city that felt like theirs to conquer. To their friends, to their families, and especially to Michael's snobbish parents, Gloria and Robert Sterling, they were the perfect couple. He the financial prodigy, she the brilliant architect who had put her own budding firm on hold to support his demanding career and curate their perfect life. The cracks, however, had been forming for years, so fine and subtle that Emily had explained them away as stress. Michael's compliments became critiques disguised as advice. "That dress is lovely, Ellie, but a bit artistic, don't you think? You want to project power, not whimsy." Her design ideas for their home were dismissed as not the right aesthetic for our brand. Their brand. That's what their marriage had become. The end came not with a bang, but with the cold, sterile click of a closing laptop. Michael came home one Tuesday evening, his posture radiating a chilling calm. He didn't even take off his Tom Ford coat. "Emily, we need to talk," he said, standing by the door as if he were a visitor. She was sketching at their Marble Island, a new community art center she was designing pro bono. "Okay," she said, putting her pencil down. "Tough day at the office." "My life is about to change." Drastically, he announced, his voice devoid of warmth. "I've been seeing someone. Her name is Tiffany Chamberlain, and I'm leaving you for her." The words hung in the air, sharp and poisonous. Emily felt the blood drain from her face. Tiffany Chamberlain. The Instagram model, Michael. She's 23. A smirk played on his lips. She's 24, and she understands the kind of life I'm building. The visibility, the networking. She's an asset. He looked around the apartment she had so lovingly designed. "I'll be generous, of course. My lawyer will be in touch." The divorce was a public execution. Michael, it turned out, hadn't just been seeing Tiffany. He had been parading her around New York's elite social scene for months. Friends who had smiled at Emily at galas last month were now tagged in Instagram photos with Michael and Tiffany clinking champagne glasses on a yacht in the Hamptons. The captions were nauseating. New beginnings. Power couple. Upgrade. Michael made sure Emily saw every post. He didn't block her. He wanted her to watch. He wanted her to see Tiffany wearing a Cartier bracelet he'd once promised Emily for their 10th anniversary. He wanted her to see the glowing feature in a society magazine about Wall Street's hottest new couple, complete with a photo shoot in their apartment. The article painted Emily as a footnote, the starter wife who couldn't keep up with his meteoric rise. The worst part was the small, intimate betrayals. He weaponized their shared memories against her. He took Tiffany to Heiress, the restaurant where he had proposed to Emily, and posted a photo of their hands intertwined on the table, Tiffany sporting a new, impossibly large diamond. The caption read, "Finally getting it right." His parents, Gloria and Robert, were equally cruel. Gloria called Emily once not to offer condolences, but to twist the knife. "Well, Emily, dear," she'd said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Michael just needs someone who shines a bit brighter. Tiffany is just so vibrant, you know. She has over 2 million followers. It's wonderful for his business." Emily moved out of the Tribeca apartment and into a small third-floor walk-up in the West Village. The silence of the small space was deafening, broken only by the city sounds outside and the frantic supportive calls from her best friend Chloe. "He's a monster, Emily. A narcissistic, soulless monster," Chloe would rage through the phone. "You are a prize, and he was too stupid to see it." But Emily didn't feel like a prize. She felt discarded. Michael's campaign of humiliation was working. She started avoiding their old haunts, stopped checking her social media, and shrank into herself. He had taken her love, her home, her confidence, and her future, and replaced it all with a bright, shiny younger model, ensuring the whole world watched as he did it. He wasn't just breaking up with her. He was trying to erase her, to paint her as the drab black and white photo before his new life in vibrant Technicolor. And for a long time, sitting alone in her tiny apartment surrounded by moving boxes she had no energy to unpack, Emily started to believe him. The first few months post-divorce were a gray fog. Emily felt like a ghost haunting the edges of a life that was no longer hers. Every corner of New York seemed to hold a memory of Michael, a shared laugh in a coffee shop, a stolen kiss under a street lamp in Central Park, a celebratory dinner in a now forbidden restaurant. His digital ghost was even more relentless. Friends with well-meaning but clumsy intentions would bring him up. "Did you see Michael and Tiffany are in Aspen?" Or "I can't believe he bought her that Birkin bag." Each mention was a fresh stab. Chloe, a fiery art gallery curator with zero tolerance for nonsense, became Emily's gatekeeper. "Listen up," Chloe declared one evening, snatching a pint of ice cream from Emily's hands and replacing it with a glass of wine. "The pity party is officially over. We are not letting that slick-haired, soulless Ken doll win. Your name is Emily Vance. You were a rising star at Columbia's School of Architecture before you decided to project manage his ego. It's time to get back to you." Chloe was right. Michael had convinced her that his world was the world, that success was measured in stock prices, gala invitations, and the reflective shine of a new Rolex. He had made her feel small, artistic, and impractical. But in the quiet of her new apartment, away from his judgment, Emily slowly began to find herself again. She unpacked the boxes not with a sense of loss for the home she'd left, but with a budding excitement for the one she could create. She pulled out her old sketchbooks, her drafting tools, her architectural models. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light as she unrolled blueprints for projects she had dreamed up years ago, a sustainable library that integrated nature into its very core, a series of modular, affordable homes for low-income families, a soaring glass atrium for a museum. These weren't just buildings, they were her soul, translated into structure and form. For 5 years they had been gathering dust under the weight of Michael's ambition. She started small. She took on a minor renovation project for a friend of Chloe's, a cramped south of Houston Street loft that needed light and life. Emily poured all her pent-up creativity into it. She knocked down a non-structural wall, designed custom shelving that climbed to the ceiling like a vine, and found a way to install a massive skylight that flooded the space with sunshine. The result was transformative. Her work was more than just good, it was inspired. The loft owner was ecstatic and recommended her to a colleague who then recommended her to another. A trickle of work became a steady stream. Emily established a small LLC, Vance Designs. She built a simple, elegant website showcasing her work, her philosophy clear in every line. "We don't just build spaces. We create environments where people can thrive." One evening, while working late on a set of blueprints, her phone buzzed with a notification. Against her better judgment, she glanced at it. It was a tag from a distant cousin. The photo was of Michael and Tiffany beaming on the cover of Modern Engagements magazine. The headline read, "A sterling match finance king, Michael Sterling and influencer Tiffany Chamberlain plan the wedding of the decade." The article was a masterpiece of curated arrogance. Michael bragged about the venue, the Oheka Castle on Long Island. He bragged about Tiffany's custom-designed 8-carat diamond ring. He bragged about their plans for a 6-week honeymoon, circumnavigating the globe on a private jet. But one quote attributed to an unnamed friend struck Emily like a physical blow. Michael is finally with someone who matches his ambition and his lifestyle. His ex-wife was a lovely girl but very quiet, more of a homebody. He needs a star on his arm, and Tiffany is a supernova. The old familiar shame coiled in her stomach. A homebody, quiet. The words were designed to paint her as a failure, a domestic creature unfit for the dazzling world he now inhabited. She closed the browser, her hands trembling. For a moment she felt herself sliding back into the gray fog. But then she looked at the blueprint spread across her desk. She saw the clean lines, the innovative concepts, the life she was building with her own 2 hands and her own mind. He could have his supernova. Supernovas were brilliant, yes, but they were also violent, explosive, and ultimately they collapsed into nothing. Emily preferred to build things that lasted. With a newfound resolve, she turned back to her work. That night, she didn't just work on her current project. She dusted off an old ambitious design from her college thesis. A revolutionary concept for a private residence built into a cliffside, a marvel of engineering and aesthetics that respected and integrated the natural landscape. It was bold, impossible, and beautiful. On a whim, she decided to submit it to the prestigious International Architectural Design Awards. The chances of winning were infinitesimal. But for the first time in a very long time, Emily Vance wasn't afraid of the odds. She was building her own foundation, one blueprint at a time. 6 months passed. Vance Designs was thriving in its own modest way. Emily had hired a junior designer and moved into a small but chic studio space in Chelsea. She was making a name for herself in New York's design circles for her innovative use of space and her uncanny ability to infuse soul into steel and glass. She was busy, fulfilled, and had managed to build a wall of professional focus around her heart. Michael and his upcoming nuptials became a dull background noise she could mostly tune out. Then one crisp autumn afternoon, an email landed in her inbox that felt like a glitch in the matrix. The subject line was simple: inquiry regarding your airy design. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs. Airy was the name she had given her cliffside residence project, the one she had submitted to the design awards. She hadn't won the grand prize, but the design had been featured on the competition's website as a notable entry. She had assumed that was the end of it. The email was from an Arthur Pendleton executive assistant to Mr. Julian Thorne. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place it. The message was concise and professional. Ms. Vance, Mr. Julian Thorne has seen your design concept, Airy, and was exceptionally impressed with its vision and harmony with the natural environment. He is seeking to commission a private residence on a property he owns in Big Sur, California, and believes your design philosophy aligns perfectly with his own. He would like to schedule a meeting with you to discuss the possibility of a commission. Please let me know your availability. Sincerely, Arthur Pendleton, Office of Julian Thorne. Emily's hands shook as she typed Julian Thorne into her search engine. The results made her gasp. Julian Thorne wasn't just wealthy. He was in a different stratosphere of existence. He was the reclusive founder and CEO of Ethelred Technologies, a pioneer in sustainable energy and AI. He was a multi-billionaire, but unlike the flashy tech moguls of Silicon Valley, Thorne was intensely private. There were few photos of him online, mostly grainy paparazzi shots of him boarding a private jet or attending a tech conference years ago. He was known for his philanthropic work in environmental conservation and for his almost fanatical dedication to privacy. This man, this titan of industry, had seen her design, and he wanted to talk to her. A week later, Emily found herself in a town car winding its way through the financial district to a sleek, unmarked skyscraper that housed Ethelred's headquarters. She wore her most professional outfit, a sharp, tailored black suit that felt like armor. She clutched her portfolio to her chest, her mind racing. This was the kind of project architects dreamed of. It could launch her career into the stratosphere. She was escorted to the top floor, a space that was the antithesis of Michael's ostentatious world. There was no gold, no marble, no flashy art. The space was a testament to quiet luxury and natural materials. Warm oak floors, walls of glass overlooking the city, and simple, elegant furniture. Arthur Pendleton, a kind-faced man in his 60s, greeted her warmly and led her to a minimalist conference room. "Mr. Thorne will be with you shortly." Moments later, the door opened, and Julian Thorne walked in. He was not what she expected. He was tall and lean, perhaps in his early 40s, with thoughtful dark eyes and a quiet intensity about him. He wore a simple gray sweater and dark jeans, no suit, no tie, no watch. He looked more like a philosophy professor than a billionaire CEO. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice a low, calm baritone. He shook her hand. His grip was firm and his smile was genuine. "Thank you for coming. I apologize for the summons to my office. I find it's the only place I can guarantee a lack of interruption." "It's an honor, Mr. Thorne," Emily said, finding her professional voice. "Please call me Julian." He gestured for her to sit and took the seat directly across from her, not at the head of the table. "I saw your airy design and I was captivated. Most modern architecture feels like an imposition on the landscape, an act of ego. Yours felt like a conversation with it. For the next hour, they didn't talk about budgets or timelines. They talked about architecture. They talked about the Japanese concept of shake or borrowed scenery. They talked about the importance of natural light and sustainable materials. Julian was incredibly knowledgeable, speaking with a quiet passion that mirrored her own. He saw everything in her design that she had intended. The respect for the environment, the flow of energy, the creation of a sanctuary, not a spectacle. He saw what Michael had called whimsy and recognized it as vision. "The property in Big Sur is special to me," Julian said, his gaze distant for a moment. "It's been in my family for generations. It's a place of peace. I want to build a home there, not a monument. A place to think, a place to be." He looked directly at her. "I believe you are the only person who can build it." Emily left the meeting in a daze. He hadn't just offered her the commission, he had offered her a partnership in creation. The budget he proposed was staggering, giving her complete creative freedom and access to the best materials and engineers in the world. That night, as she began the preliminary sketches for the Big Sur residence, an embossed cream-colored envelope arrived by messenger. It was thick and heavy. Her heart sank as she recognized the Sterling family crest on the wax seal. It was the wedding invitation. "Michael Sterling and Tiffany Chamberlain request the pleasure of your company at the celebration of their marriage." Inside, a small handwritten note was tucked in, penned in Gloria Sterling's perfect cutting script. "Emily, dear, I do hope you'll come. It would show such good grace. We all need to move on after all. Besides, you simply must see Tiffany's dress. Warmly, Gloria." It was a command performance. A summons to witness her final complete replacement. 2 months ago, it would have shattered her. But tonight, as Emily pinned the invitation to her corkboard, she felt a strange sense of calm. She looked from the ostentatious, gaudy invitation to the elegant simplicity of her new project sketches. One was a world of performance and public image. The other was a world of substance and quiet creation. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was on the outside looking in. She felt like she had been liberated. The next 3 months were a whirlwind of creativity and intense focus. Emily flew to Big Sur twice to walk the stunning, rugged coastline with Julian. The property was even more breathtaking than she had imagined, a dramatic cliff overlooking the crashing waves of the Pacific surrounded by ancient cypress trees. Her collaboration with Julian was unlike any professional experience she'd ever had. He was deeply involved but never controlling. He would ask insightful questions that pushed her designs to be better, more innovative. They spent hours on video calls, not just discussing floor plans and structural engineering, but philosophy, art, and what it truly means to create a home. He listened to her, truly listened, with an attentiveness that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't realized she'd been missing for years. During one late-night call, while they were debating the specific type of reclaimed timber to use, Emily found herself laughing freely at a dry joke he made. She paused, surprised by the sound. When was the last time she had laughed like that? "Is everything all right?" Julian asked, a flicker of concern in his eyes. "Yes," she said, a genuine smile gracing her lips. "Everything is perfect. I'm enjoying this. The work, the process. It's reminding me of why I fell in love with architecture in the first place." "Good," he said, his own smile soft and genuine. "Your passion for it is what makes the design extraordinary." The compliment was simple, direct, and landed in her heart with a warmth that had nothing to do with validation and everything to do with genuine respect. It was the polar opposite of Michael's backhanded praise. As the wedding date loomed, Chloe was adamant. "You are not going to that circus alone. I'm coming with you. We'll be fabulous, unbothered, and we will leave the second anyone says anything stupid, which will probably be within the first 5 minutes." Emily agreed. She knew she had to go. Not showing up would be seen as weakness, as proof that she was too broken to face them. Showing up composed and confident was the only way to truly close that chapter. She bought a dress, a stunning midnight blue silk gown, that was elegant, understated, and fit her perfectly. It wasn't flashy or revealing. It spoke of quiet confidence, the very quality Gloria Sterling had once dismissed. The wedding at Oheka Castle was exactly the spectacle Emily had expected. It was a hurricane of white roses, ice sculptures, and shimmering gold accents. Tiffany, in a massive jewel-encrusted dress, looked less like a bride and more like a pageant winner. Michael was in his element, preening in his custom tuxedo, greeting guests with an owner's pride as if he had personally invented marriage. He spotted Emily and Chloe across the ballroom and made a beeline for them, Tiffany in tow like a prize show dog. "Emily, I'm so glad you could make it," he said, his voice booming with false magnanimity. "It means so much that there are no hard feelings." He wrapped his arm possessively around Tiffany's tiny waist. "Have you met my wife, Tiffany?" "We haven't been formally introduced," Emily said, her voice even and calm. She met Tiffany's gaze. The younger woman looked slightly nervous up close, her smile a little too bright. "Congratulations." The ceremony was beautiful. "Thank you," Tiffany gushed. "Isn't this place just a dream? Michael planned everything. He's just so capable." "The best or nothing, right?" Ellie Michael said, using the old condescending pet name. "Speaking of, I heard you're doing some small renovation projects now. That's great. Good for you for keeping busy." The jab was meant to sting, to remind her of her smallness in his grand world. Chloe's hand tightened on Emily's arm, ready to intervene, but Emily was unshaken. "I am keeping busy," Emily replied smoothly, a serene smile on her face. "My firm is doing very well, thank you." Before Michael could press further, Gloria Sterling descended upon them. "Emily, darling, you look nice," she said, her eyes doing a quick, dismissive scan of Emily's dress. "So brave of you to come. Now you must excuse us. The photographer wants some shots of the happy couple with the CEO of Goldman Sachs." As they swept away, Chloe muttered, "I think I'm going to be sick." Emily just shook her head, a genuine small laugh escaping her. "It's okay, Chloe. It's all just noise." And for the first time she believed it. Seeing Michael in his natural habitat, so desperate for external validation, so obsessed with the performance of happiness, she didn't feel sadness or jealousy. She felt a profound sense of pity. They stayed for one drink, and then, as promised, made a graceful exit. As they waited for their car, Emily's phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "I heard tonight might be difficult. Just remember that what you are creating in Big Sur will outlast every champagne tower and ice sculpture there. It has substance. You have substance." Emily stared at the screen, her heart doing a slow, surprising flip. Julian. He must have gotten her number from Arthur. He had thought of her tonight of all nights. His simple private message of support meant more to her than any public display of affection ever had. It was a quiet acknowledgement of her worth, a whisper of a new world that had nothing to do with the loud, hollow spectacle she was leaving behind. Looking back at the garish lights of the castle, Emily realized she wasn't escaping a painful memory. She was simply leaving a party she had no interest in attending anymore. Her future was waiting perched on a cliffside in Big Sur, bathed in the quiet, steady light of the Pacific sun. Autumn bled into winter, and the Big Sur project, officially named the Thorne Residence, became Emily's magnificent obsession. The designs were finalized. The engineering challenges met with brilliant solutions, and the initial groundwork had begun. Her professional relationship with Julian deepened into a genuine friendship. They discovered a shared love for obscure literature, minimalist art, and long walks. He visited New York more frequently, and their business meetings often bled into dinners at quiet, out-of-the-way restaurants where they would talk for hours. Emily found herself drawn to his calm, insightful nature. He never bragged about his wealth or success. Instead, he spoke about his responsibilities, his desire to leave a positive impact on the world, and his genuine curiosity about her perspective. With him, she felt not like an accessory, but an equal. The attraction between them was a palpable, unspoken current growing stronger with each meeting. It was slow, respectful, and utterly real. Meanwhile, Michael and Tiffany Sterling were on a relentless PR tour of their own marriage. Their social media was a fire hose of curated bliss, skiing in Gstaad, shopping on the Avenue Montaigne in Paris, sunbathing in the Maldives. Michael was frequently quoted in financial columns, and he always found a way to mention his stunning and supportive wife, Tiffany. He was building his brand, and his marriage was the cornerstone. The collision of these two worlds was inevitable. It happened at the annual Metropolitan Museum of Art Conservation Gala, the undisputed pinnacle of New York's philanthropic scene. It was the one event Julian attended every year, as he was the primary benefactor. This year he had asked Emily to be his guest. "As the architect of my most important project, it's only fitting you be there," he'd said, though the look in his eyes suggested a deeper meaning. Emily accepted, her heart fluttering with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. She knew Michael and Tiffany would be there. It would be their first public encounter since the wedding. When Julian arrived at her apartment to pick her up, she was momentarily breathless. He was in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, looking impossibly handsome and sophisticated. But it was his smile, warm and meant only for her, that made her feel truly beautiful. "Emily," he said, his voice soft with admiration. "You look exquisite." She was wearing a deep emerald green gown, a color that brought out the light in her eyes. It was a classic, elegant design by a lesser-known designer she admired. It was a dress that whispered confidence. It didn't scream for attention. Their arrival at the Met was quiet and understated. Julian, valuing his privacy, used a discreet entrance, bypassing the main crush of paparazzi on the red carpet. Inside, however, they were instantly the center of a very powerful universe. Captains of industry, famed artists, and old-money philanthropists greeted Julian with deference and warmth, and they all looked at Emily with intense curiosity. Julian introduced her simply and with evident pride. "This is Emily Vance, a brilliant architect." They were enjoying a glass of champagne near the Temple of Dendur when a familiar grating voice cut through the sophisticated buzz. "Well, well, well. Look who's here." Michael Sterling stood before them, a wide, predatory grin on his face. Tiffany was on his arm, dripping in diamonds and a gaudy, feathered Versace gown that seemed to be wearing her. "Ellie," Michael said, his eyes flicking over her dress with a hint of a sneer. "I almost didn't recognize you. trying a new look. He then turned his full attention to Julian, extending a hand. "Michael Sterling, Morgan Stanley. We haven't been properly introduced, Mr. Thorne. It's a real honor. My wife Tiffany is a huge admirer of your work in technology." Julian shook his hand briefly, his expression unreadable. "Sterling?" "Yes. I've seen your name." Michael puffed up with pride. "Oh, well, great to hear. We're really making waves in the emerging markets division." He then gestured towards Emily with a dismissive wave of his hand. "I was just so surprised to see my ex-wife here. Small world, right? She's more of the quiet, stay-at-home type. I've been trying to encourage her to get out more since our split." The condescension was thick enough to cut with a knife. He was painting a picture for Julian. "This is my cast-off, a simple girl you found who is out of her depth." He was trying to establish dominance, to reclaim Emily as a character in his story. Emily felt a flush of anger, but before she could speak, Julian moved slightly, placing a subtle protective hand on the small of her back. The gesture was both intimate and commanding. "I believe you're mistaken, Mr. Sterling," Julian said, his voice calm but laced with steel. "Ms. Vance is not the stay-at-home type. She is in fact the creative visionary behind my new residence in Big Sur. It's the most ambitious private architectural project in North America right now." A stunned silence fell over their small group. Michael's jaw went slack. He knew the rumors of the mysterious Thorne residence. It was the talk of the financial and architectural worlds, a project with a seemingly unlimited budget shrouded in secrecy. To be the architect on that project wasn't just a job, it was a career-defining coronation. Julian wasn't finished. He looked at Emily, his expression softening into one of genuine affection. "And she is not here because I am encouraging her to get out more. She is here as my partner." He didn't need to say more. The word partner hung in the air, electric and definitive. It was a quiet checkmate. In one calm, devastating statement, Julian had not only annihilated Michael's narrative, but had elevated Emily to a level of prestige Michael could only dream of. Michael's face, which had been a mask of smug superiority, crumbled. He stared at Emily as if seeing her for the first time not as his mousy ex-wife, but as the architect of the legendary Thorne residence, and the partner of the man everyone in this room revered. He saw the beautiful, confident woman in the emerald dress, and for the first time a flicker of horrified realization crossed his face. He hadn't just discarded her, he had misjudged her value on a catastrophic scale. Tiffany, sensing the sudden dramatic shift in power, looked confused. The Thorne residence weight is that the one Architectural Digest is calling the eighth wonder of the modern world. Julian smiled down at Emily, ignoring Tiffany completely. "Shall we go find our table?" he murmured for her ears only. As he guided her away, leaving Michael and Tiffany standing there in stunned, humiliated silence, Emily felt a profound sense of release. It wasn't the thrill of revenge. It was the quiet, powerful joy of being seen, respected, and valued for exactly who she was. The king had been toppled not by a loud declaration of war, but by the simple, undeniable truth. The aftermath of the Met Gala was a silent, deadly shockwave that radiated through Michael Sterling's carefully constructed world. The news of Emily Vance, visionary architect of the Thorne residence, and Julian Thorne's new partner spread through New York's elite circles like wildfire. It was the ultimate society gossip, a story so rich with irony and reversal of fortune that it was irresistible. For Michael, the humiliation was acute and relentless. At work, colleagues who once fawned over him now looked at him with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. The Sterling name, which he had worked so hard to associate with success and power, was now the punchline to a citywide joke, the guy who traded a masterpiece for a knockoff. His boss, a man who valued perception above all else, called him into his office for a chat about his public profile. The implication was clear. Michael's brand was now toxic. His parents were mortified. Gloria Sterling called him her voice, a hysterical whisper. "Michael, what have you done? Everyone is talking. The Vanderbilts, The Rockefellers. They're all asking about Emily. They think we're fools, that we cast out a diamond and kept the zirconia. But the most significant damage was happening within the walls of his own Tribeca apartment. The foundation of his marriage to Tiffany, built as it was on the shallow bedrock of status and image, began to crumble immediately. Tiffany's identity was intrinsically linked to being the ultimate upgrade. She had won the prize. The Met Gala shattered that illusion. She had been publicly revealed not as the winner but as the consolation prize. The man she married, whom she believed to be a titan, had been effortlessly dwarfed and dismissed by a true giant. "How could you not tell me who she was working for?" she shrieked at him the night of the gala, her feathered dress now looking ridiculous in their sterile living room. "You made me look like an idiot. You stood there bragging about your job while she's literally building a landmark with Julian Thorne. How was I supposed to know?" Michael shot back, his frustration boiling over. "She was designing closets and loft renovations. It doesn't make any sense." "No, what doesn't make sense is you," Tiffany retorted, her perfectly made-up face contorted with fury. "You told me she was a nobody, a quiet, boring little homebody. But she's the one at the table with the billionaires, and I'm the one you're dragging around like a handbag." Their arguments became a daily occurrence. Tiffany's admiration for Michael, which had always been tied to his perceived power and status, evaporated. She now saw him through the world's new eyes as the man who had fumbled the ultimate prize. She grew resentful, her posts on social media becoming less about their hashtag couple goals and more about her solo shopping sprees and spa days. The we of their brand was dissolving into a very bitter me. Michael in turn began to look at Tiffany and see not a supernova, but a black hole of expense and superficiality. He saw the endless bills for clothes bags and treatments. He heard the vapid conversations about influencers and brand deals. He compared her obsession with selfies and follower counts to his memory of Emily sketching quietly at their island, lost in a world of creation and ideas. The ghost of Emily haunted him. He started to remember things he had long since buried, the intelligence in her eyes when she talked about her designs, her quiet strength, the way she could create warmth and beauty out of nothing. He had called it whimsy, dismissed it as impractical. Now he saw it for what it was. Genius. A genius he had thrown away because it didn't fit into the narrow, boring box he had labeled success. He became obsessed. He scoured the internet for articles about Emily and the Thorne residence. He saw the accolades, the praise from the world's most respected architectural critics. He saw photographs of her and Julian, candid shots of them laughing on the Big Sur site, looking at each other with an easy intimacy that he and Tiffany had never once managed to fake for the camera. The final nail in the coffin of his marriage came a few months later. A deal Michael had been counting on at work, a major stepping stone to a promotion, fell through. He later found out through a colleague that the primary investor had pulled out after a private dinner with Julian Thorne, where Thorne had casually mentioned that any associate of Michael Sterling's was, in his opinion, a man of questionable judgment. Julian never had to say why. He didn't have to lift a finger in anger. His quiet disapproval was a more effective weapon than any overt act of revenge. That night, Michael came home to find Tiffany's closets empty. A single perfectly manicured note was left on the marble island next to a copy of the latest issue of Vanity Fair. On the cover was Emily Vance standing in front of a breathtaking photo of the half-finished Big Sur house under the headline, "The Architect of the Future. How Emily Vance is Redefining American Design." Tiffany's note was short. "I'm going to my mother's in Palm Beach. My lawyer will be in touch." Michael Sterling stood alone in the silent, empty apartment that Emily had once filled with life. He was a king in a kingdom of one. He had bragged to the world about his beautiful bride and his perfect life, and now he had lost it all. Not because Emily had sought revenge, but because she had simply moved on and embraced her own worth, a worth so immense that its light had cast his entire world into shadow. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the sound of his own spectacular failure. 2 years later, the Thorne residence was complete. It wasn't just a house, it was a masterpiece. Cantilevered over the Pacific, it seemed to float between sea and sky, a perfect fusion of natural materials and futuristic design. The home was featured in every major architectural publication worldwide, winning Emily the prestigious Pritzker Architecture Prize, the highest honor in her field. Vance Designs was now an internationally sought-after firm with a long wait list of discerning clients. But Emily's greatest triumph was not professional. It was personal, quiet, and deeply profound. Her relationship with Julian had blossomed into a deep and abiding love. They were partners in every sense of the word. He celebrated her successes as if they were his own, and provided a steady grounding presence that allowed her creative spirit to soar. She in turn brought warmth, laughter, and a new perspective into his structured private world. Their wedding was the antithesis of Michael and Tiffany's ostentatious affair. They were married on the terrace of the completed Big Sur home as the sun set over the Pacific. There were only 30 guests, close family, and their truest friends, including a beaming Chloe as the maid of honor. Emily designed her own dress, a simple flowing silk gown that was as elegant and timeless as her architecture. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising not a lifetime of performance, but one of partnership, respect, and quiet joy. There was no society photographer, no magazine deal. The only announcement was a simple post on the Vance Designs website a week later, with a single photo, their hands now adorned with simple wedding bands clasped together against the backdrop of the ocean. Emily rarely thought of Michael anymore. He was a figure from a past life, a lesson learned. She had heard through the grapevine that his divorce from Tiffany had been messy and expensive. He had lost his promotion at Morgan Stanley and eventually took a lesser position at a smaller, less prestigious firm in Chicago, effectively exiled from the New York financial world he had once worshipped. His star had not just faded, it had been extinguished. On occasion she would feel a fleeting sense of pity for him, for a man so blinded by ego that he couldn't see the real value in anything, including himself. One evening, Emily and Julian were sitting by the outdoor fire pit at their home, a gentle breeze coming off the ocean. She was leaning against his shoulder, sketching in her notebook not for a client, but for pleasure. She was designing a small, free community library for the nearby town of Carmel. "What are you creating now?" Julian asked, his voice a soft rumble against her ear. "Something small," she said, smiling. "Something for people to share." He kissed the top of her head. "My brilliant wife. You build worlds, Emily, whether they're out of glass and steel on a cliffside or out of paper and ink for a small town." In that moment, Emily felt a sense of peace so complete it felt like coming home. Her triumph was not that she had married a billionaire. That was simply a beautiful consequence of finding a man who saw her. Her real victory was that she had rebuilt her life on her own terms, according to her own blueprint. Michael had tried to tear her down and brag about the rubble, but he had failed to understand a fundamental principle of architecture: a strong foundation can withstand any storm. And from the ashes of her old life, Emily Vance had not just built a house. She had built an empire of her own happiness. Life at Big Sur settled into a rhythm of breathtaking beauty and profound peace. For Emily, the past was no longer a shadow that followed her, but a closed book on a distant shelf gathering dust. Her days were filled with light, both literal and metaphorical. She and Julian had founded the Thorne Vance Foundation, a philanthropic venture dedicated to funding sustainable architecture and protecting natural landscapes worldwide. Emily poured her soul into it, scouting projects, mentoring young architects, and using her platform to champion a new generation of design that was both beautiful and responsible. Her marriage was a sanctuary. With Julian, she discovered the quiet power of a partnership built on mutual intellectual curiosity and unwavering emotional support. Their love wasn't a spectacle for public consumption. It was 1,000 small private moments, debating a book over breakfast, hiking the cypress trails behind their home. In comfortable silence, his hand finding hers as they watched the fog roll in from the Pacific. She was happy in a way so complete and foundational that the brittle, performative life she'd led with Michael seemed like a story about someone else entirely. The echo from that old life arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, carried on the agitated voice of her best friend. "Emily, are you sitting down?" Chloe asked, her tone stripped of its usual sarcastic levity. Emily was in her studio, the glass walls offering an uninterrupted view of the ocean. She put down her charcoal pencil. "I am now, Chloe. What's wrong? You sound rattled." There was a hesitant pause. "He found me," Chloe said, her voice low. "Michael, he's here, in New York. He reached out to the gallery, said it was a matter of life and death. I met him. God, Emily, I don't know why I met him, but I did." A cold dread, unfamiliar and unwelcome, trickled down Emily's spine. She hadn't spoken Michael's name or heard it spoken in her presence in over 3 years. "What did he want?" "To talk about you," Chloe said, her voice laced with a mixture of disgust and a strange, unsettling pity. "Emily, he's a wreck, a complete and utter disaster. He looks 10 years older. His suit was cheap, it was fraying at the cuffs. He's lost everything. The job in Chicago didn't last. He apparently made a series of terrible high-risk investments trying to make a big comeback and got wiped out. The Sterlings cut him off completely after the second divorce. He's been living in some rundown apartment in Queens selling insurance or something equally grim." Emily remained silent, her mind struggling to process the image. The slick, arrogant man in the Tom Ford coat was gone, replaced by this pathetic phantom. He sat there in a coffee shop in south of Houston Street. Chloe continued, her voice gaining a harder edge, and he started talking about the old days, about how he was a fool, how he was blinded by ego. He said he reads every article about you, that he's so proud of everything you've accomplished. He cried, Emily. Actual tears. Said you were the only real thing in his life, and he threw it all away. What does he want, Chloe? Emily repeated, her voice firm, cutting through the emotional preamble. There it was. The real reason. He didn't ask for money. Chloe admitted. He's too proud, or maybe just too manipulative for that. He wants a recommendation, a second chance. He heard the foundation is backing a new sustainable urban development project in Chicago, a massive one. He wants you to put in a good word for him, to help him get a meeting with the developers. He said he just needs one break to get back on his feet, to prove he's a changed man. Emily closed her eyes, the sound of the distant waves filling the silence. The audacity of it was breathtaking. After a campaign of public humiliation, after attempting to systematically destroy her self-worth, he was now appealing to the very grace and decency he had tried to extinguish. He wasn't asking for a handout. He was asking her to leverage her hard-won success, the very success built from the ashes of the life he torched, to salvage his own. Do not respond to him again, Emily said, her voice a calm, cold blade. Don't take his calls. Don't answer his emails. Send him to me. Emily, no, Chloe protested. You don't owe him the time of day. Let me just tell him to get lost. He won't stop until he hears it from me, Emily stated with certainty. He's banking on the idea that I'm still the same woman he can manipulate. I need to close the door myself. For good. That evening she told Julian everything. He listened patiently, his dark eyes watching her, gauging her reaction. When she finished, he didn't offer advice. He simply asked, What does your heart tell you to do? My heart tells me he's a black hole, and getting too close means getting pulled in, she said honestly. But there's this stupid, nagging voice that feels a sliver of pity for the man he's become. Pity is a noble emotion, Emily, Julian said, taking her hand. But it should not be a leash that allows your past to drag you back. His current situation is the direct result of 1,000 choices he made. You are not one of those choices anymore. Your only obligation is to your own peace. She knew he was right. The next day, she sent Michael a single terse email from a new address created specifically for the purpose. Michael, Chloe passed on your message. I am willing to have one and only one 5-minute phone call with you tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific time. You will call my assistant's number. This will be our final communication. The next morning, she sat in her studio, Julian by her side, but out of frame of the video call she had initiated with her assistant Arthur, who would connect Michael. The call came through precisely at 10 a.m. Michael's face appeared on the screen. Chloe had been kind in her description. He looked haggard, his face puffy and pale. The old confidence was gone, replaced by a desperate, hungry look. He was in a dimly lit room that was clearly not an office. "Emily," he breathed, his voice cracking. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means to me. You look incredible. Happy." "I have 4 minutes, Michael," she said, her tone devoid of emotion. "What do you want?" The directness clearly threw him. He stammered, then launched into the same speech he'd given Chloe. The apologies, the regrets, the self-flagellation. He was performing the role of the penitent man. Emily let him speak for 2 minutes, then cut him off. "You want a recommendation for the Chicago project?" "Yes," he said, his eyes lighting up with hope. "Just a word, Emily. An introduction. From you, it would mean everything. It would give me a chance to atone, to build something real again." She looked at him, at the ghost of the man she once loved, and felt a profound and final clarity. He hadn't changed at all. He didn't want to atone. He wanted a shortcut. He still saw her not as a person, but as a resource to be exploited, first her support, now her success. "No," she said. The word was quiet, but it landed with the force of a landslide. What he whispered, his face falling. "No, Michael. I will not be giving you a recommendation. I will not be making an introduction. The life I have built is a testament to what a person can achieve with their own merit when they are free of toxic influences. Your path back, if there is one, must be the same. It must be your own. You want to build something real. Then start from the foundation. Get a job. Work hard. Be honest. Earn your way back. That is the only atonement that matters." Desperation flooded his face. "Emily, please, I'm asking for your help. After everything we shared." "What we shared is over," she stated, her voice unwavering. "And my help would be a disservice to you. It would be one more unearned prize for a man who has never understood the value of anything he didn't acquire easily. My final gift to you, Michael, is the truth. Your life is your responsibility. Goodbye." Before he could respond, she ended the call. The screen went black. A deep, shuddering breath escaped her. She had not been cruel. She had been definitive. She had offered him not the help he wanted, but the advice he needed. Julian's hand came to rest on her shoulder. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. Emily turned to him, a slow, genuine smile spreading across her face. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, but it was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of release. "I am now," she said. "I'm finally completely free." The echo had faded, and all that was left was the sound of the ocean and the steady, reassuring beat of her own peaceful heart. And so Emily's story isn't one of revenge. It's a powerful testament to the fact that the greatest success is living well and true to yourself. Michael Sterling thought worth was measured by public opinion, by the flashiness of a new partner. But Emily proved that true value is intrinsic. It's in your talent, your passion, your integrity. While he was busy writing captions, she was busy building a legacy. In the end, he became a forgotten footnote in her incredible story. What do you think is the most powerful form of comeback? Is it loud and vengeful, or is it the quiet, undeniable success that speaks for itself? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If Emily's journey from heartbreak to triumph inspired you, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, And make sure you subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of empowerment and unexpected victory. Thank you for watching.